to north to be south to be north. Where I'm from, Virginia. Of course, to south to be north to be south. What it's like. Hey yo, it is what it is. Yeah, hey yo, what it is what it is. It couldn't be nothing else. We brought down place off.
So, you know, I'm trying to get the format on this thing down. So you're sort of my guinea pig.
Awesome.
You're the first person that I've tried to do this with. And
trial and error. We'll do it punk rock.
Yeah, rock and Econo, dude, with this first episode for sure. And just who knows? We hope this whole thing will record, but
you know, a great idea.
It's possible that much like our greatest musical conversations, this will be lost in the dustbin of history also.
Or it could be the start of a great musical ethnography of Northern Virginia, or Reston especially, which is duly needed.
That's exactly what we're trying to do. That's the whole point of this thing, Jams for Man, that I'm trying to start up. And so, in keeping with that spirit, why don't you tell the people who you are, where you're from, and you know, why you should be somebody that we should be interviewing about Reston and music in Reston.
Got it. Absolutely. Well, my name is Derek Douglas, and I currently reside in Alexandria, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., and I am from Reston, Virginia, in Northern Virginia. Born in Roanoke, actually, but moved up to Reston when I was 1 year old, and obviously grew up there in the great town. And it's Reston, I believe, is, and you and I have talked about this many times, is that it's a very different place in Northern Virginia. You know, it was the one suburban town that had you know, different socioeconomic levels. So when you're a kid, you kind of grew up with or played in basketball and baseball with kids that came from subsidized housing. At the same time, you hung out with kids that grew up on really nice houses on lakes. And so you kind of had a great melting pot in the true sense of the word in Reston. And from a musical standpoint, Reston at those times in the 80s was pretty far removed, you know, at least from our standpoint when we were in grade school, from kind of Washington, D.C. And so Washington, D.C. obviously was blowing up in the early 80s and the mid-80s with a pretty strong punk rock scene and indie rock scene. Then at the same time, you know, African Americans, the main black music that was being developed was go-go, which, you know, unfortunately is never really gotten out of the D.C. Baltimore area. And so a lot of that was happening in the mid-'80s. And so obviously this was before, you know, the internet and everything, and a lot of it was just word of mouth. So out in Reston, a lot of those musical styles kind of came out, I guess, mostly through people's older brothers. I guess that's a good way to connect it. So I had an older brother, Davis, who was 6 years older than me, and he is a musician and was back then. He was a drummer. He would play in some local bands in the mid-aughts. And so he went to Gonzaga High School, which is the Jesuit all-boys school in D.C., which had a very strong connection to go-go because Junkyard would play at their prom each year.
This is throwback, y'all. We salute. If you don't know this one, you don't know the song. Salute. Walk your toes, it's back in the big Chuck days. Salute.
And they would have a musical contest called the Screaming Eagle Jam. And so my brother would play in a couple of rock and roll bands there. His bands would play at the Reston Community Festival they used to have at Lake Ann. And so through him, I was kind of able to hear a lot of the music that was going on coming from D.C., both go-go and punk rock. So I was, you know, in fourth, grade. And I think older brothers, Andy, might be a good theme of this. I know there's a lot like, you know, like Tom Maskey's older brother, and I think like Steve Bidwell's brother. I think a lot of older brothers.
My older brother too.
Your older brother, yeah, kind of were a good connection between independent music in the '80s and their younger siblings and how some of that music came about. So I think in a nutshell, I kind of grew up with this music, and a big thing happened to me was I think it was in '85. My next door neighbor, the Hernandezes, moved in, and they came from New Jersey, which is right across the river from New York City, obviously. And so they had, I was really great friends with Andreas Hernandez, who also grew up in Reston. And he was a year older than me, but he brought all these mixtapes of hip hop. And so I had never really heard it before. This is about like '85. So I think this is right when the Run DMC's second record, King of Rock, came out. And I think like we heard like those awful rap songs like the Rappin' Duke and maybe, Rapper's Delight. I can't really remember, but it was like a new thing I was listening to, Metallica and whatever MTV was playing and some of that stuff. And then, I want to say that I was so hip and I was listening to Joy Division and stuff like that back then, but no, I'm not. I don't think anybody was. But anyway, he would play me these tapes that he got in New York, where obviously hip hop was already huge in the mid '80s, and I just immediately fell in love with hip hop. And people kind of ask me what was the first thing that grabbed onto, and to me it was the cadence of the rhyming, and just I never heard anything like that before. And then of course, like everybody else, was just absolutely flabbergasted by scratching. I think there's always a bunch of stories about the first time someone heard scratching. Like I guess a lot of times people mention seeing Grand Mixer DFT for Herbie Hancock on Rocket. Like I think he performed at the Grammys in like '84. You would see him, scratching. And so
that was absolutely mine. That was mine. I was just about to say that.
Exactly. And so that was a huge deal. And then of course Run DMC had one of the greatest DJs of all time, Jam Master Jay, and so. I was really kind of drawn to that. So then, I just gobbled up as much hip hop as I could. I was going to a private school at the time, the Langley School in McLean, and obviously, nobody there knew what hip hop was. And so I thought I was kind of like the punk rock rebel kid in fourth grade, playing them, Run DMC, playing them Dougie Fresh. I think I did a lip sync to the show at the talent show in fifth grade. And so I love this music so much, and by the time I went to public school for sixth grade, and then I came to Langston Hughes in junior high, and I kind of grew up, I would say, with a lot of African Americans, especially through playing sports. I definitely did not have many in my private elementary school. But definitely, Langston Hughes, a huge, definitely a bunch of different races. I don't remember what the numbers are. I remember someone threw out that South Lakes and Langston Hughes was maybe a third minority. Kyler, does that sound about right, or maybe a little bit more?
Third sounds about right. I mean, I was going to say a quarter, but yeah, it could be quarter, third, something like that.
And definitely,
But the influence was stronger than that.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, so the influence definitely being the hip hop culture, the clothes. I had a pair of skids. I think most people, would dress up, kind of emulating. And then at the same time, this is in, '89, '90, UMTV Raps came out, which was groundbreaking, so that everybody kind of knew, like what all the first, the big hip hop songs that came out, and that was, the golden era, like '88 through '92, like the first golden era of just all those incredible records, like Boogie Down Productions and Nation of Millions, Holds Back by Public Enemy, the first Tribe Called Quest album, all of that was kind of blowing up during that time. And so during this phase in junior high was when I really kind of got into trying to DJ. So obviously, like probably every single suburban kid in the world, I tried to scratch on my dad's turntable, much to chagrin. And he had like a really nice like dead-end turntable with probably pretty expensive cartridges that are not made for back queuing. And so kind of messed up some records. And so, but yeah, so that, and I got really kind of interested in that. And one thing that I kind of picked up about was, where are they getting this music from? So obviously a lot of hip hop in the early 80s is mostly kind of drum machines, or they would use an actual live band, like this band called Orange Crush did a lot of the music for Run DMC. And because like sampling wasn't really there yet, the technology was just so expensive. But 89, I guess, sampling really kind of took off with hip hop, and mostly because the technology got a little bit better and it got cheaper. And so a lot of, the early beat makers like Marley Marl and Q-Tip and Ali Shaheed Muhammad from Tribe, and definitely Prince Paul, which did, the groundbreaking De La Soul record, they started kind of combing through, older music, like their parents' music to make beats. And so obviously a lot of it was funk. James Brown, was all over the place, the Funky Drummer Break and Think About It by Lynn Collins that he produced. And so, and a lot of jazz, obviously. And so anything that had kind of a funk or a soul to it, was being sampled. And so, I always loved that music growing up. And so I was lucky that I loved music. And so whenever he would be washing the dishes, in the kitchen after dinner, he'd always have like the classic rock station on, or the jazz station. So, and he was a great record collector, which I still have all of his records. He handed it down to me. So I grew up listening to Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix, and jazz, mostly like John Coltrane and Miles, and a lot of that great Kool and the Gang, the early 70s Kool and the Gang. And so, I think it was start hitting me when I started recognizing certain samples in music that's being used in hip hop. And so, then, I understood that, the reason why they have a DJ is because a DJ is playing the records, and that's what they're rapping off of. And obviously, none of us, I don't think back then knew how hip hop came to be. Like I said, this is before the internet. Like, I think we just kind of knew about these guys in the parks and in the Bronx, right? But, so then, what kind of dawned on me was that you could basically kind of use your musical knowledge and use that to kind of create something new. And so I got a horrible realistic mixer from Radio Shack and 2 terrible turntables from Radio Shack, and kind of learned how to DJ or scratch on them. And so, some of the good news is I think it's great for everyone to always start out on crappy equipment, because, as you get older or better and as you have more money, you're kind of able to kind of graduate pretty well. And so basically, a lot of us, we didn't really know what we were doing. So, I think, nowadays we kind of take it for granted that, anyone can go into YouTube and find out how to use certain kinds of technology, or, like hip hop right now is like the most popular music in the world. So I think everybody understands how to make hip hop music, whether it's through, software and everything. But I think back in the
don't you just buy FL Studio and press a button,
right? It's pre-programmed,
and then you have hip hop.
And I think a lot of us in the early
you just mumble some lyrics over top.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of us in the early '90s, we had the ear for the samples and the beats, and we had friends that could rhyme, but a lot of us were kind of in the dark production-wise. I didn't have any friends in the music industry. I didn't know anyone else that did hip hop really. So my first rap group that I was in was in 7th and 8th grade, called Reality, with Byron Stafford and TJ Phobes. Byron may be a good guy for you to try to get on this podcast. And so, we didn't really have like a drum machine or anything. And so
Byron stopped making music. He doesn't believe in making hip hop anymore. Which is
kind of class.
He's over hip hop. He is he does still like to acquire and sell classic shoes. That's sort of his hip hop hustle, I believe, in addition to his actual grind. But TJ runs his own studio in Baltimore now.
I had no idea.
And so
Right.
I believe he would. I mean, whereas Byron could definitely give a viewpoint on what he was doing back in the day, TJ was doing it then and is still doing it now.
That's
So
great.
something to be said for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to say
And
that
still
TJ.
making great stuff.
They were talented, back in 8th grade, and our big show we played at a festival at Lake Fairfax Park in Reston, and
I was there.
And so obviously we weren't really making any, we didn't have any samplers. I think I guess I got cut off earlier, but so we kind of knew what samples were and what samplers, but obviously there wasn't a website you could really go to and learn about stuff. I think I had Word Up magazine, and I think one issue they had Marley Marl kind of explaining his studio, whatever. But the big machine back then was the SP1200 drum machine sampler. I think in '92 or '91 it cost $1,000, and it may as well have been it costed $10 million, right? To some, people like us. And so, obviously we weren't doing that, but what I would do is just buy hip hop 12-inch singles from Tower Records and then kind of spin those back and forth. Or, I think we had some old funk records I had doubles of that I would kind of spin the breaks back and forth. And so what was kind of funny is looking back on it years later is that's how hip hop originally was made. These guys in the late 70s, early 80s spinning these disco breaks back and forth. Of course,
why they call it breakdancing.
Why they call it breakdancing, but we had no idea that's what they did, and so they didn't have documentaries about hip hop or the history of hip hop or anything like that, and so I think it's kind of funny how we kind of discovered it organically, there's a few bars of this drum break, but if you go back and forth on the records, that's probably why they have 2 turntables. So that makes a lot more sense now. They're not just for scratching, and so we kind of learned it. So kind of what I was saying earlier, all of us back in those days, no one really knew what we were doing. We loved the music, and I think also, which is important, and a lot of us are still listening to, quote unquote white people music, I guess is what we called it, rock and stuff. And there's some great stuff coming out, Red Hot Chili Peppers just came out with Nothing Shocking, their first album, or the second. That's
Jane's Addiction.
Jane's Addiction, and then
Chili Peppers had Mother's Milk.
Mother's Milk,
then,
that's what I was thinking of. I could picture the
Blood Sugar Sex
the
Magic
boobies in my head, right, on the record album. So, that was pretty cutting edge, and you can't stress the importance of how great MTV was. I think for a lot of people back then. It was back when MTV actually showed music television. They actually showed videos, and so that was exciting. And I think another a key date in so I guess a good way to put it is that a lot of this music was going on in that time period. I was probably one of the
Can I actually ask though a little bit more about Reality?
Sure.
How did Reality come together as a band?
I think it was mostly because I was friends with those guys. We were in the same classes in high school or junior high. I guess because I knew because Byron was in my math class with Mrs. Wilkins, and then we all played Ribble. We were all in basketball together, and I think everybody liked hip hop, and I think they I just talked to them about, hey, I really want to be a DJ. And, and so I think that was it. And then, Derek actually has turntables. So why don't we kind of just hang out with him and make tapes? And so I think it was literally just because of that. And so they'd come over to my house and we'd sit in my basement and we'd make tapes. And like I said, none of us knew what we were doing. We had these horrible, microphones from Radio Shack. Radio Shack was really big. The one over in Fox Mill Woods is where everyone got all their equipment. And just started making tapes in the basement, and we made records, and then I think at one point Reality may have had 8 to 12 people in it.
I was gonna say there were some girls in the band, or at least you guys
Reality
had dancers.
Reality was more of a collective. It was more of a frame of mind than an actual band, but but the heart of the band, like the only people that did anything were TJ, Byron, and myself. But I remember like there was this whole like somebody knew somebody that we were gonna get like custom made, you know, like spray painted denim jackets, and used jeans were big. Like we got like these outfits, and I don't really know whatever came of that. It didn't happen though. But yeah, it was because I think like we were gonna like, you know, kind of get into go-go too, and because also back then like hip house was a big thing, like Ladies First by Queen Latifah, like some of that house beat, and I think that's when that Kid and Play movie came out, House Party, and all that fun stuff. That was, you know, the fun times of 8th grade at Langston Hughes. And then, you know, so I think also during that time period, the summer of '91 was the first summer of Lollapalooza, which, you know, back then it was very cutting edge. And I won't kind of describe what Lollapalooza was, but it was a great mix of rap music and rock, right? And so I think like the headliners back then was like Ice-T, and they had like 9 Inch Nails and Jane's Addiction, because it was started by Perry Farrell. And so lo and behold, one of the venues they hosted it at was at Lake Fairfax in Reston, Virginia, which just like blew everybody's mind. Like, you know, they were actually
the same venue that had hosted Reality.
That Reality, we warmed it up for Jane's Addiction at the stage for that. And I remember like everyone was just so excited that this thing was happening in Reston, like this big music festival and everything. And you know, I hate to say it, but I didn't go to that Lollapalooza. And I think it wasn't nearly as big as it became, but then definitely the next year, summer of '92, was when it really blew up. And I think that's when it had like, and obviously because those, you know, that year was incredible for music. Obviously you had the whole Seattle alternative grunge thing going on, and then like, you know, techno really blew up, and then hip hop was awesome that year. So I know a lot of people came out to that. I rode my bike there, and we snuck in. I think it's Scott Cassidy and I snuck in the middle of Soundgarden's set. And so, I mean, you know, back then, you know, like, you know, what security are they going to do with this huge park that butts up against, you know, the woods in Reston, where every single kid knows all the bike paths and trails, you know, with the back of their head. So I remember we snuck into that. And so, you know, I think that time period was just a great mix of different styles of music kind of coming together. Obviously, Lollapalooza was at the national stage, but I think, you know, for us in high school, that was also the same time period that Jam for Mans were happening, the name of this podcast, where they would have these concerts at the old Wrestling Community Center. I guess it was mostly punk that would play on it, and if you would bring like a can of food, you would get, it was like a $3 $3 entry fee. And so, you know, what were some of the bands that played at those? Like the Sun Monkeys and Avail, maybe. Like Avail was actually getting pretty big then. Rich Kids and LSD. You know, Tom Matthews, old band. The LD Kids. You know, a lot of these bands that really were from Reston, but really kind of took a lot of the DC hardcore scene in there. And you know, I don't know why they never really had any hip hop or go-go music perform at those. I guess it's just because they didn't really have the bands as much in Reston. But I remember that was really big, and that's when I started kind of getting into you know, the rock. And you know, I definitely got into the trends as well as everybody else, and that's when I started playing probably bass guitar was around that time period. But I never lost my interest in beats and hip hop. And I think, you know, I was very fortunate to have been, you know, 15, 16, 17 years old when, you know, hip hop was just exploding creatively. I mean, not only was it becoming very popular music, but the music that was very popular was also the best, which, you know, I think there's a very small window for that, when not only is the popular music, like the stuff they're playing on the radio and the stuff that's playing on MTV, but it's also creatively the pinnacle of its kind. So, you know, Nirvana, Nevermind was an incredible album. Pearl Jam was incredible. Tribe Called Quest is huge. I remember when Midnight Marauders album came out in summer of '93, you know, people went bananas over that. And so I think we were just really fortunate to have lived that time period. when all of that was kind of happening. And, you know, then I guess throughout high school, we got a little more serious with making music. I know that I got into more constructively making beats. I had upgraded my mixer to another crappy mixer, a Gemini, that had still have it somewhere.
Don't knock the Gemini.
And it had a
I not only have mine somewhere, it's on my desk in my room.
Hey, it still works, yeah. And it had a 6-second sampler on it, and so it could do like a loop. And so what I started doing was I had this 4-track cassette deck, like using like for, I think you had one too, that you'd use for home recordings, and so a Tascam. And so it would, you know, I would record loops. But obviously on the Gemini, you can only have one loop at a time, and so I would, you know, lay down a drum loop on one track and then grab like another one, like a horn or a bass or something. And so it was, you know, it was tough. You had to do everything manual, you know, to like kind of beat match in your head. I mean, I know nowadays I recently got back into kind of looking to see, you know, how to make beats again, and I got like a new MPC MIDI controller for my Mac, and, you know, had some software, was messing around with it, and it's just mind-boggling how easy it is now to make to make beats, the sample and everything. I mean, like literally, you know, you can line up all the sine waves, and you know, you can cut out things, and you know, back then it was a lot more difficult, but you know, in some ways, I think I'm paraphrasing Jack White, is that it's better to limit yourself. It makes you more like creative. Like I'm actually scared of what I can do now with, like, you know, with this new software, because it's endless on the opportunities you can do. And I kind of like being, you know, constrained into a box with limited tools and just trying to make the most out of that. And so that was kind of my first entry into beat making. And then, you know, college, obviously, like I think anybody else, is huge, but I'm trying to keep it back, you know, closer to the rest. And I think what was great is that all of us went out to different schools.
And no, I mean, look, you were still relatively local, being in Charlottesville at UVA.
Yeah, that's true.
And
so
certainly a lot of people from Reston went to colleges like UVA, like JMU,
Virginia
like
Tech,
Tech,
JMU,
like
right, all the
like Mason, and so you know, Virginia schools are somewhat an extension of the Northern Virginia music scene, and certainly some of my high school memories, even because in 12th grade my girlfriend was going to UVA. So I was going there to go to, you know, parties all the time and check out music and check out what was happening on like the college scene musically. And, you know, also you started a record label in college with somebody else from the Northern Virginia music scene.
Yes.
And on that label put out a whole bunch of music from people from the Northern Virginia music scene. So your college years and that whole thing were very much connected to Northern Virginia and Northern Virginia music.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, to tie it into Northern Virginia and Reston was it was great because you kind of realized how unique Reston was as a place compared to other areas within the DMV. You know, just kind of musically as well, but to your point, I think a lot of us met people at colleges and kind of, you know, go back home. And so, you know, one of my still best friends, John Hastings, who is still a musician, he's a composer living in New York City, and so he was in a pop rock band called Uterus in college, and then for a little bit after college. And so he went to Gonzaga High School, I mentioned earlier, my brother went to, and so he was a guitar player, really good, really great one. And so he and I made fast friends. He lived down the hall from me in my dorm my first year of college. And so I kind of, you know, showed him a lot of hip hop and sampling and how that works and technology wise. And he really opened my eyes to So a lot of rock and roll and indie rock and things of that nature that I had never heard of, and hardcore stuff. And so he and I became fast friends, and he and I started collaborating on music, in the summer. I think Andy Kyler was involved with a couple of those projects back in those days. I think there may or may not have been a hardcore version of Margaritaville that we did together.
Wasted away again in Margaritaville, searching for my lost shaker or some. Some people claim there's a woman to blame, but I know it's nobody's fault.
Anyway, it was good, and so it was really great because I introduced you to John, and you guys obviously became fast friends and collaborators, especially when you both lived in LA. Years later, and then I think what I remember is kind of just coming home and the summertime and definitely like hanging out in my basement or hanging out in your basement, just drinking and smoking weed and listening to a lot of music and kind of just like I remember you introduced me to Mike Fu obviously and Mike Walker and a couple other guys like that and Mike Walker and I later on collaborated on a track together. And, I think it's a good point is that Northern Virginia just became kind of this melting pot of a lot of talented people, different musical styles. And I think what was great was that there really wasn't a lot of, I don't listen to that music or, that's not very good. A lot of people were very supportive about like whenever someone like you would play me tapes with so-and-so, like I know you and I would make a couple tracks with, Tepper Gill, and actually, I've listened to those in recent years, and it's actually kind of surprised, like, hey, this don't sound too bad, and just kind of a lot of collaboration, and I'm happy that after college, as you mentioned, I started a record label with John Hastings and Sam Jacobs, called Annex Records, and we started that right after graduation, and kind of got that off the ground, and the internet was kind of just starting back then. So this was like 99. And so we didn't really know, again, what we were doing, but we just, wanted to put out good music. And so, we put out a sampler of Utris and of my music. So my name changed to Page7 became my nom de guerre for recording music. And the name, the secret is the name means absolutely nothing. I used to keep a notepad next to my bed, and because I'd wake up early in the morning and have ideas for songs or great samples or things that would go together and scribble down on the notepad. And I just woke up in the middle of the night and said, Page7 would be a great name for a band. And I wrote it down and immediately went back to sleep and forgot about it until the next morning. So, it's a fun name, and I'm happy to say that people still refer to me that a lot. But yeah, so in those days, I got a job, started a little bit more money, so I was able to buy a little more professional equipment and, started making a lot of beats using an MPC 2000 XL and a Yamaha SU700. And so I know, Andy, whenever you and I would get together, we would collaborate on music, and it was always lightning in a bottle. I mean, we would get together just for a few hours on one day and, put together some great tracks that are still floating around now. And so, I think I can kind of just, end my biography just by talking about how we did put out probably the bigger Annex Records sampler that Andy Kay had a track on, and lots of other Northern Virginia bands, including Infectious Organisms, and a couple other hip hop groups that I was connected to, and some electronic artists, Satellite Dub from Scotland, and it was a great project. And then we did a couple showcases in Charlottesville, and Utris, John Hastings' band, did a couple shows up and down the East Coast, and I would go and support them. Page7 would open up for them now and then, and that was good times. And then alas, it just kind of starts falling apart, and the mid-aughts and Annex Records ceased to be. I think we kind of just lost sight of what it is that we wanted to do, and the story of many independent record labels. But it was a great experience, but yeah, I think to kind of bring it together to this topic of this podcast, it really was the Northern Virginia community. and a lot of people kind of contributed to that, and it really had to do, I think, it was growing up in this area, Northern Virginia, and being connected to, a very diverse music scene, and I don't know what the ingredients were to develop that. I don't know if we were the right distance away from DC to not be completely connected to it. We didn't grow up during the internet, so we didn't have that kind of global connections with stuff. We just had word of mouth, mostly people passing around records and mixtapes. Like the Go-Go mixtape was always a big thing. Like someone would go to DC and get a couple and bring them to parties. So it was great to have all that, coming together, and I think there is a specific ethnography of music culture in Northern Virginia that I imagine is unique to compared to other spots in the country, or maybe in the world.
So, I've got two thoughts based on what you just said. One, I think that up until this point, I just realized that we've underestimated the importance of basements.
Oh, yes, absolutely. You didn't have garage, you had basement.
Right. Whereas, there's GarageBand or whatever, but we never played in garages. I don't remember playing in anybody's garages.
It was too, garages, it was too hot or it's too cold,
But we played in your basement all the time, and we played in my basement all the time. And anytime I went over to anybody else's house and we rocked out, it was always in somebody's basement. So there's something there to the fact that a lot.
I think it was a mix of three things. It was probably one, great acoustics. Two, it was a place where you could be loud and your parents wouldn't be upset. Three, you could drink and smoke weed and not really get in trouble.
Yeah,
I think a mix of those three things probably added to it.
It's the perfect combination of all those things. Plus, there's just a certain amount of dankness to a basement.
Oh yeah.
And
it's not nice. Like your family doesn't have their nice stuff in the basement, right? It's
dark. It's dark and
right.
nasty, and it's dank, and it just it brings a certain funk.
Right. I completely agree.
To the music, having it being made in the basement. The other thing that I wanted to say was I'd like to hear more about your influences, and from that time in Northern Virginia and otherwise, but particularly Northern Virginia wise, or just you've mentioned Go-Go, you've mentioned DC punk rock. What were some of the specific tracks that influenced you, that you heard from them growing up, that just made you more interested in those genres
of DC music in particular?
Yeah.
Okay.
Were there particular songs or particular bands that just stood out at that time?
Sure. I mean, I think the first one on the top of my head, I was a pretty big Fugazi fan, and I remember the first time I heard Waiting Room, I loved it. Just had that incredible, Brendan Lawley, bass line opening up with it. It was funky, but it had, obviously Ian MacKaye from Minor Threat doing the vocals and kind of the call and response vocals for it. I mean, that was one song. I'm trying to remember what year that came out. It was Fugazi, so it was probably 88, 89. I mean, that had a huge impact on me. And you know what? I'm gonna be honest and say a huge song was "Doing the Butt" by EU. And obviously, it was a very popular song at the time, but
I love that album. I love that.
Oh, it's
album.
fantastic. And so they're like, the one.
The whole thing.
Right. And so that's a great one. And then one that's actually connected to hip hop was Trouble Funk's Pump Me Up. So pump me up.
Pump me up.
Because that was sampled a lot on a lot of hip hop music, and I knew it first from the Trouble Funk song, and then of course like Sardines from Junkyard was huge, and so I mean I definitely didn't I definitely was not influenced by the deep cuts from the go-go world, definitely kind of just more of the popular stuff. And like I said, they didn't really have any hip hop, and so it was mostly just go-go. And then I was basically kind of all over anything from Discord Records, which was the record label in DC, and then we moved to Arlington from Ian McKay's band, so Minor Threat. So I was a little bit too young by the time Minor Threat was huge, and when they broke up, but their songs, and I remember you could get it was like one tape with Ian McKay on the cover. It was like their complete discography, and so like obviously each song is like 90 seconds long, and you have all the classics on there, Guilty of Being White, the song Minor Threat, and so I played that a lot as a kid, kind of before I kind of moved on to hip hop. Rites of Spring were a great band back in those days, and so yeah, a lot of kind of that limited area, limited window of Discord for me for the rock side, and then for hip hop, or excuse me, for go-go, I still love Junkyard, and then later on, a very underrated band was the Huckabucks, and so they were kind of I guess we call them more gritty of go-go, and so they were. I think they were early 90s, early mid-90s. And then you had Backyard, which was another answer to Junkyard. And so then a lot of these bands are kind of interchangeable. And I know that I went to one show, I think I was like in 7th grade, and it was at this place. I can't remember the name of the club, but it was right on South Capitol Street. It became Nation, which was a great club back in the day. It was before that, so it's like right where before you get to Nats Park now, the whole neighborhood's completely changed. And so,
was it Buzz then?
Say that again.
Was it Buzz? Was that what it was called before?
I want to say it had like a
Nation?
space name to it, but it was right by Nation. It's so that's where most of the clubs were. So, I remember I would go to go-go shows. I was in junior high, and you would get a lot of looks because, you're this white kid hanging out, and I'd be there with some of my other friends that were African American, but, I never got any trouble because I think people just thought like I was a narc or something, like something's wrong here. Like, why is this kid here for the show? So no one ever gave me any static. So that was fun. I mean, the music was great. I mean, it was so loud, and again, kind of bringing it back to, like hip hop, it's the syncopation. It's the beat, it's the calling and responding on top of the beat, I mean, there's a lot of similarities between hip hop and go-go in that regard. And it's all about the drums. It's all about the beats. And, so, I mean, I think that's, kind of the DC influence. And obviously, all the other music that people loved was huge on me. And I think kind of giving me my musical sensibilities. James Brown, I mean, you can't, it's people can talk about that he's overplayed, but if you just listen to Cold Sweat, Funky Drummer, Pablo Don't Take No Mess, The Boss off the Black Caesar soundtrack, and you hear the drumming done by Clyde Stubblefield and John J.O. Starks, which unfortunately just passed away a few weeks ago. And like what they were doing was just, trend setting and kind of just reinvented music, 25, 30 years later into the late 80s, early 90s. So, I mean, a lot of that, listening to that kind of growing up really put it in my head when I started DJing and trying to make beats. And what I love about it now is that I'm still finding, like, I don't really make beats or music as much as I used to or at all, but I am an avid record collector still. And, I think one of the benefits of modern technology is that I can go buy all this stuff online and I'm still discovering music. I still, it's easier to go. It's crazy that in 2018, it's easier to go record shopping than it was in 1993, right? Because back then, like, they weren't really making records; they were making CDs, and now, I don't even know if they sell CDs anymore, but everyone's putting stuff out on vinyl, and so. It was great, back then, kind of digging through the crates and rediscovering stuff. And so, and obviously back then, you didn't really know what was a popular breakbeat. And I would buy all of the Ultimate Break and Beat series. And obviously, some people call that cheating, but I would use that to craft a lot of samples or to get drum sounds for. But the best part is that they're just fucking awesome records. Like, just listening to them, the stuff from it. And then, it would kind of help you be a musical archaeologist to kind of dig out, who was on that, you start to learn, record labels and producers and, different session musicians. And so you start looking on the back of record count, see that who played bass on this, who played drums on that and everything. And I've actually started, a spreadsheet that I've created for mostly just jazz, where I'm kind of cataloging all the jazz records that I own and the label and the producer and who's playing each one, and I need to kind of go through that and do that for all my funk and breakbeat records too.
Wow, I had no idea that you were doing spreadsheets.
Oh yeah, man, I'm killing it.
That's awesome. You know what you made me think of, which is funny, and it kind of comes back to the idea that I had for this show. When it comes to today and the availability of music, you kind of have almost anything you want at your fingertips, whether you're talking about it's a rare record and you just, you go on eBay or Amazon and you can locate almost any rare record you want. And, Spotify, you almost don't need to, like you said, go to the record store or get a CD or anything like that, because you can stream almost anything you want from the internet or from Spotify. But the things that I kind of want seem to be the things that I can't have, I can't find. And I can't find all of these local groups, all of the musicians that I either jammed with or heard about their bands or, listened to their bands back then on some tape in somebody's car or, at some random set at Dharma Coffee House or something like that. There's all of this music from these bands from Northern Virginia during that time that I grew up hearing, and so much of it went unrecorded, or if it was recorded, it just was never put out. I think it wasn't put out onto. It hasn't made it onto Spotify. It hasn't made it onto iTunes. It hasn't made it onto Bandcamp even. it's
that's a great point. Because I think a lot of the music that we knew of local bands or artists in those days, they weren't signed to record labels, or if they were on an independent label. I mean, because you have to, like, back then, recording and manufacturing music was expensive as shit. I mean, like nowadays, my MacBook, I could produce a unbelievable professional sounding album. But obviously in the early 90s, it was expensive to go to studios.
And you could put it out for $40.
Yeah.
And get it everywhere.
And I think also another problem is that in those days, if they were on a label or if they independently produced it, they probably put it on CDs or cassettes, and those are long gone. I mean, like, they probably should, if they would have put it on vinyl, it'd probably still be around. And so, so this is a message to if anybody has any of this music from that time period, please digitize it and put it in, an MP3 file or something, and so we can have a record of it. And I mean, I think, that's, like, I have a bunch of old tapes that I would, Lord knows what happened to them. And I hate to say it, I'm like everybody else. Like, everyone says, like, oh, like, I have so much old equipment that I don't have anymore that I sold, or like when you're moving and you just want to get rid of stuff. And, I used to have all these old tapes of stuff. And it's like one of those things you look back on it now, I'm like, why didn't I just keep that? And like old go-go tapes, that would be like fourth generation copy, and they sound like shit, but I'd have all these mixtapes that, you get from, like, hand them, people and pass them out. And definitely I had mostly, I guess, dub tapes of all that music that you're talking about, either from like a live show or whatever. I think I had a couple of Jam for Man shows, like someone would, like, bring a tape deck to plug into the soundboard for Jam for Mans. And yeah, man, I'm unfortunately, that stuff, I mean, I'm partly to blame. I got rid of tons of that crap. And, I kind of wish I had it now, because it'd be great to see that. And it's funny that you can find this really rare esoteric Funk 45 from 1968, from this band in the middle of, Ohio, but you can't find any music from the early 90s of, like, one of the Virginia bands.
Yeah, I can't find it from my own hometown, from the people that I grew up.
No, it's unfortunately it's lost to either.
Well, and part of it also, I've gone on YouTube too, and I was hoping that I would be able to find, that somebody would have digitized some VHS, videoing of some of these shows, or something on, like, cable access, or
right,
whatever you have. And there's nothing on YouTube either.
That's crazy.
There's there is practically nothing. So,
well, I mean, I think it's the same thing like me. I mean, I think people had the VHS tapes, the cassette tapes, but in the intervening 20, 15 years, through moving around, you just try to get rid of stuff. That stuff was handed over to Goodwill or whatever. I mean, like, I don't even know.
Part of this show's mission is going to be to encourage people to go digging through those closets, digging through those basements, storage units, what have you, going over to their mom's house and trying to dig out those VHSs or those tapes that you talked about, and
I look to you. I mean, I think you have more of my old tapes than I do, so I look to you to catalog that stuff.
Well, yeah, and I will put something together. I will put together a mix of stuff as like a companion piece to go along with this of your stuff. So in terms of that, because yeah, I do have pretty much everything. I mean, I don't have anything from reality necessarily.
Oh man, I don't think anyone does.
I don't think any of that exists, and if you can,
maybe it's for the best.
If you can find it, if you can go over to your mom's house and go digging through the closets and there is a tape somewhere, I encourage you to do so. But
I have been searching for 20 years. I made one of the first. So back when I had my old Roland MS1 sampler, this 8-bit sampler, which I loved, and I don't have it. I got rid of it for some stupid reason. I made a remix of the Police's Voices Inside My Head. And I had a couple, like it's a loop sampler, so I had a couple, samples from the actual song on there, and then I would play on top of it, like beats and stuff, and I put it on a cassette tape. And I have some of my older, like original Page7 tracks. I luckily had them and I burned them on the CDs back in the day, and I put them on MP3, so they exist. But I cannot find that tape that had that remix I did. I think I took it to a party and played it at a party, and then just left the tape in the deck or something like that. But if anybody finds that, please let me know, because that's the one thing that I'd love to find.
Well, I do still have the Tascam in case any of it is on 4-track and you need something to play it on. I do still have that and can dig it out and get something going if needs be. Do you have any of those 4-track tapes? But
yeah.
Of your sort of discography, what would you say are some of the main tracks that you're most proud of that you've done? Stuff that I do probably have.
Okay.
And what would you say are the things that kind of show your growth and demonstrate, who you are as a musician, as an artist, as Page7?
I really liked Rhythm Rocket, which was from the first
NX sampler.
And that's on. I think that's probably on Spotify. That was using my old Roland sampler, and so that was kind of one that I was kind of like forced to kind of push it to the maximum amount of technology that I could use. But I remember recording it, and it was just a lot of fun, and I was really happy about it.
Rock to the rhythm, to my body, rock, rock it. Rock to the rhythm, to my body, rock, rock it. Rock to the rhythm, to my body, rock, rock it. Rock to the rhythm, to my body, rock, rock it. Rock to the rhythm, to my body, rock, rock it. Rock to the rhythm, to my body, rock, rock it. Rock to the rhythm, to my body, rock, rock it. Rock to the rhythm, to my body, rock, rock it.
I really like Adumbration, which I think is on your Spread Virginia album.
It is.
That was a great one, and it was just another example. So when I would, even though all my music was sample based, I would actually perform it live when I recorded it. So I wouldn't, because obviously I didn't have a computer, so I wouldn't kind of like set up everything, but I would have, usually I would have the Yamaha loop sampler, and then I'd use the MPC to do the drums. And so I'd have all the drums like programmed, and then it'd be MIDI to play together. But I would kind of perform it live. And so, you know, it would really only be like 1 or 2 tracks. And so I kind of did that, and that was a good example of everything kind of coming in. And so I was like, well, what I should have like something scratched over, like a phrase or whatever. And so I had this a vinyl copy of Orson Welles doing the War of the Worlds radio bit back in.
I have that record too.
And so and I really kind of just made it as I was going along, like the scratches I was doing on top of it just worked perfectly with the music and kind of flowed on top of it, and yeah, I really like that.
World being watched closely by intelligences greater than man. Infinite complacency.
So this is all in the same time period. So this is all, you know, like 2000, 2001. And I was really happy with a track I did that I don't think was put on record, but I do have it on my SoundCloud page called Pax Americana. And so that's pretty complex, a lot of beats on it, and it's just kind of fun. And definitely for hip-hop competition that I did with SMI and DJ Mike Bree, that was a great one. I was actually very proud of the beat that I put to it, and the scratching that Mike Walker does on top of it is just unbelievable.
The awkward motion of my wrist is splattered the wall when I'm angry. Useless attempts to tame me. Plainly, I contain the right genetic makeup to break up your dates, but for a pay cut. Say what? Break down the gate and infiltrate your estate's gut. My super bracelet could turn you into space dust. Smoke so many leaves that it'll make your rake bust. It's time to take us seriously, cause I can furiously make no mistake. Undertake, cremate, and bury this beat. Guilty of possession, from the procession to the place we're destined. In war we're living, but in peace we're resting. Those that got out, forgot about who they left it. So that prompts me once again to have to ask the question. Yo, what kind of world have we left them? Come on, let's build, I'm more than open for suggestions. Y'all worrying about yourselves, when that just ain't the total. In this day and age where machines allow us to be mobile, it's our responsibility to start thinking global.
trust a man in the Oval, yo. Hopefully until smoke MCs, cause it's just too close to call my steez. I am somebody who can't concede defeat, proclaims this is why they can't compete.
I really liked Phonogenesis by Processor, which is a group I was in with John Hastings, called Phonogenesis or Phoenix Rising. With the name of the song changed depending on what release it was on. It's on Spread Virginia. I think it's called Phonogenesis, but that was
the last track.
Yeah, so that was a great one because I did it with John Hastings, and so I programmed the beats, and then he played guitar and bass on it, and then I went over to Scotland to do some work with Satellite Dove. I was helping him produce some tracks, and so then I was with him, and I was like, hey, he has all this crazy synth equipment. And so he and I, we put on a mini Moog on top of it, and he added some other, really killer, synth waves, wave attack sounds on it. And then I took that back home, and it had some scratching on it. And so again, with the scratching, I basically just pulled a couple records out, and luckily they fit out of it.
Sounds as diverse and haunting as the strange new world in which we live.
Well, Andy K, what's your favorite track that you and I collaborated on together?
I'm a big fan of Raptor.
That's a great one.
From the 9/5 recording.
What's a great connection to DC music with that one, and we didn't really talk about, is 18th Street Lounge Music, ESL, the record label for Thievery Corporation, because we did that track after hanging out at 18th Street Lounge for a while, after I had a couple cocktails, and then walked to my apartment in DuPont Circle at that time and made that song.
Yeah, that place was so chill.
Yeah, good time.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. It was a bar that reminded me of just hanging out in somebody's basement.
They
That's
knew
why
what they were doing. Yeah.
That's why I felt so comfortable there. It reminded me of just like chilling on the couch, like we were back.
They had great DJs. They had a
really good music.
They had because they actually have the recording studio in the club, and this guy that was a friend of a friend got me to go in to see part of the studio and the DJ booth there, and obviously Thievery Corporation has an unbelievable record collection, and so that was really cool to see. That was good times. So those are probably my top favorite songs that I'm proud of.
Yeah, I really like some of the stuff that we did on the Universal Tactics, Page, the Andy's Basement one, the Conversation 7. I really like that track. I've always liked that one a whole lot. And it was really fun when you came out here to LA and we did stuff like Si Se Puede.
John
That was that was where the three of us were collaborating together because I did the album, the Singularity album with John Hastings. But that was one of the only times where it was the three of us, where it was just the three of us collaborating, and that of course, it was fun when Mark Rotterman was involved too.
Yeah.
Because Mark is just everything is hilarious when Mark
underrated freestyler too. Underrated freestyler.
Oh man, I mean, I have a whole tape of basically Rotterman recordings on the mic. I can share that with you. I don't know if we want to share that with everybody.
I forgot to mention, he and Mark Archer from our high school were in a band called RSWB, Ross and River White Boys, which was, I guess, a hip hop / live music. I guess it wasn't really rock. I guess it was more funk. But yeah. So basically, by live music, I meant that I would play a loop beat and Archer would play guitar and I play bass on top of it. But that was fun. And Mark Archer he's doing well playing music. He lives out in Gainesville, Florida. I think he does a lot of bluegrass and but I'm see him on Facebook and he never puts the guitar down.
Nice. See, this is what I'm talking about too. It's like practically there were just so many good musicians, and even if you never, because I never actually jammed with Mark, but Archer, that is. But of course I knew him, and there's so many people that I didn't even realize, and they're still making music today, and I'm like, oh yeah. You had a band, or you were making music, or that was going on then too. It's hard to believe all of that was going on at that time. And if I had one criticism about Northern Virginia music at that time, it might be that there wasn't. I don't know. There weren't enough venues for it, or there wasn't enough encouragement put into trying to create these opportunities for kids.
There was
to make music and play, and to have an all ages venue. I mean, it would have been great if there had been a place, Jam for Men was once a year in the community center. Why wasn't there a place like that every weekend that we could go to?
I know. I think that's a good point. And really there wasn't really much of a network either, I think it was kind of like you and your friends did something, but you didn't really know about other people doing something. There wasn't really like a clubhouse or you always read these stories about these different areas where music kind of grew up, these scenes got together. I think Reston didn't really we had music, but there wasn't really necessarily a scene where people would kind of collaborate with each other. It was really kind of just word of mouth. You know, people knew people from high school or friends from other high schools and things like that. And so, yeah, I think Jam for Man may have been more than once a year, but yeah, it definitely wasn't a weekly thing. And then also, you know, we weren't going to be going out to DC all the time, going to shows because, you know, we're teenagers.
The Metro didn't go out to Reston back then.
Metro didn't go out to Reston back then, and we were out to DC back then, and yeah. So I agree. I mean, I think it would be really interesting to see if there was more of a way to do networking and collaboration back in those days if we had the internet or whatever. To kind of support people and things of that nature. Or I mean, even if there would have been a record label.
Zine. There could have been a zine, or if there had been a record label in Reston, or you know, if there was some sort of radio show, or if there had been like Channel 8 had its own sort of MTV, you know, version for Reston kids, or something like that on it. So it was a very disparate scene. There were so many people doing things all in their different basements or their little pockets. And I guess if anything, you know, what I'm trying to do with this show is connect all the dots, connect them together once and for all, show the scene and bring it to the light of day. Yeah, no, I think it's great, and this has actually been fun for me to kind of remember. I probably should have done some prep beforehand and jotted some things down, but maybe if I remember some more cogent topics, I'll give you a call back or arrange for a follow-up discussion. But just doing it top of my head. This was amazing. In fact, I was very impressed by your ability to just give a rundown of what the scene was. You spent like the first 10 minutes of the show essentially putting it all together for everybody and giving a history of all the different music in that scene. So I think that sets the tone for what this is perfectly. And awesome. Any of the 10 people who might wind up listening to this, you know, they'll have a pretty good overview or general picture of that. And then hopefully later on we can have you back and we can do a deep dive into certain specific things. And, you know, we also really hope that you will start getting some musical equipment back together and start making beats again at some point. Yeah. It's been a little bit like I've definitely been listening to more music than I have in years. Like I said, you know, I have my spreadsheet and I'm cataloging my collection. And I have found myself, I have a notepad and I start taking down notes about snippets of music I hear that would be great as a sample. And so, you know, I've sold my old MPC and I liked using it. And but what's great now is that it's a lot easier to use. So a lot easier to use the MPC software on my laptop than it was, you know, on this machine. But yeah, so like baby steps, I kind of have to relearn how to use the technology. But luckily there's videos on YouTube that show you how to use it. And so, you know, hopefully I won't be too scared away by the unlimited potential of some of the software. But at the end of the day, man, you still got to find the records to make the beats out of too. Yep. And sampling is never easy. No matter No, it can be made easier, but don't let anybody ever say that sampling and looping is totally easy, especially if you're doing it off vinyl. That
Exactly.
is.
Yeah,
So,
like I guess like kids these days like just pull things from YouTube, like beats and stuff, and I was reading some articles about like people don't look, you should only do it, but like I used vinyl because that's what was available, but also it sounds fucking phenomenal when you pull a drum that was EQ'd and set perfectly in 1972, and I want that sound to be on the record.
Yeah, plus just the crackle of it and
exactly
and everything.
Right.
The feel of it. There's something to be said. We know that anybody that has been putting together a record collection since they were a little kid and digging in the crates for that long, you know why you use the vinyl, and that can't be. There's no substitute for that whatsoever. So regardless of what kind of technology you put together, we still expect you to be dusting off records and scratching on them too.
Yeah, I still have one of my old DJ mixers. I never got rid of it. I still kept that, but obviously I have a turntable. But yeah, I need to figure out a little mini studio in the new house. So I obviously the laptop is easy to use, and you could probably come over and kind of show me how all the new technology works. But yeah, so because I've been thinking a lot more lately, and that's why I'm kind of like I shouldn't have gotten rid of that old equipment. I should have found room for it somewhere. But at the same time, now the stuff that's available is everything that I had and then some. So
well, new equipment brings new ideas. Like every time
exactly.
you switch whatever you record on and the instrumentation, you're switching up your process, and you're going to come up with a different kind of music out of that, and that's always
right.
good. Every project you should switch it up a little bit, do something a little bit different, so that you have something a little bit different coming out of it. So, listen, I'm not going to take any more of your time today, but thank you for all of the time that you've dedicated.
Yeah, man, this is great.
And putting up with any of our sound difficulties and everything. But thank you so much, Derek Douglas, Page7, for being the first guest on Jamster, man. This really sets the tone and has been awesome.
Fun. This is fun.
It's great.
I hope it develops.
All right. Well, you'll be the first person that I send it to, and you'll hopefully be our first guest back too, sometime in the future.
Man. I appreciate it.
So thanks a lot.
Take care.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.